Okay, we're going to look today at some aspects of the first class taken from the text of Rudolf Steiner. It's on its archive, which I'll add to the link down below so people can look it up and refer to it, and I'll also share and we can look at it as we go along. So as you can see behind me, we have this image here of footsteps going across the desert, and very much I'm using this image here to evoke this sense of memory and of retracing our steps in memory and becoming more aware of the steps that we make when we come to build our memory of events, of things that we've done, perhaps exploring our life, or perhaps also searching for our understanding of what's happening to us in our lives. Now, this could have an element of karma research, is something that we've spoken about before, that's for sure. And it could have, in its preliminary aspects, it could also mean coming to recognize in this preliminary sense the engagement with what's happening in our lives and how, in a deeper sense, karma is playing into this. But before we can get into any of that deeper research into karma, we have to establish the chalice. We have to establish the meditative inner work and practice that enables these changes to take place and enables research such as that, whether we speak of aksharic record or if we speak of biography work, so that the changes that take place in our consciousness, in our whole being, can enable perception of such realities to start taking place in us. So I'm using this image very much because I like it. I like the golden aspect that this photo is evoking. And I like this sense of the footprint of how our will has taken us down certain paths in life. And it's very much the will measured into every very last deed that has shaped the reality around us. So as we're looking at it, as we're looking at the image, as we're listening to the words I'm using to describe this, I'm asking you to go also in this journey, to think of your own journey, to think of the journey that we're going to go on in this talk itself, and to think of that difference between what you're thinking, what you're seeing, this is the visual aspect, what you're hearing in terms of the words I'm using and the pictures that I'm bringing the words to evoke certain experiences in your soul as we're perceiving these things, as we're listening to these things. And then on a deeper level, we're recognizing the kinesthetic aspect in the will, the movement that we can more broadly see as we move through life, as we take these steps through, they're leaving impressions on the world. And this is another very nice way that Steiner describes this, in terms of every deed that has been done has left its imprint in the aksharic record. And so every deed is there, kept in a hall of records that we can come to perceive should we develop our inner meditative skills to be able to behold this. And one exercise I just encourage people to do is as a preliminary exercise to everything we were looking at today, is in inner sight, to be able to project and hold images as if on a screen before us. And this may be an image of an event, a biographical event, but it can also be the practice of holding any object before us on this inner screen, and to be able to very precisely link up the perceptions. So whether it's this pen, silver plastic, about 10 centimeters, my hand, my shirt, my arm, or the image, the photograph behind me, the footprints, the gold, the different tones of the light, the grains of sand, the size, and how that sits in relation to me on this screen. All these are perceptions, and we're holding them. And inwardly, we can take these perceptions and learn to behold things very vividly before us, as if on a screen, as if on this very screen, like a monolith, before us. And we can hold this, and to the extent that we can learn to hold in meditation images like this, we can learn to move images, we can learn to transform them, and we are developing our inner hold concentration to be able to hold deep inner work and the movement and transformation of images. And all of this can enable also the spiritual to come in and support and strengthen our work. Now, if you're finding this difficult, or any of this consolidation or bringing all these things together, it's simply establishing an inner practice where we're asking also for help with these things in prayer, in inner work, in meditation. And it's really the engagement with these ideas, with our practice, with our meditative work, that brings us deeper into be able to into being able to engage deeply with some of these deeper esoteric themes. So that's, again, more of a preliminary, more of a preface to begin this journey that we're going to do today, just looking at in a very modest way, just 2 paragraphs from the first class, from lecture 1, GA 270 in RS archive, and we're going to look at a number of images as if this very path has taken us as if to a gate. So I'm just going to add another image then behind me, and we're going to look at this one. Now, this behind me, the bigger image here, I'll take me out of the way. Just give me a second, but you can see behind me, this is the Janus head, the Janus Kopf. And here's the the whole image here, what we have is Janus Kopf, the Janus head, Kopf in German, is known as the God form that presides over gates. Now I'm putting this here, maybe in a personal sense. This is something that speaks to me quite deeply, because Rheinfelden here is a place with 4 gates to the 4 directions, and many rivers that one crosses, which is again quite significant for esoteric work. And so my flat here at the top of Obertorplatz is in German the higher gate. So the gate to the spiritual world, we could also speak of in the first class, and in the anthroposophical terminology, we're often speaking of the threshold. So the threshold that one is carried over, this is where we come also to the use of the Janus head, also for marriage ceremonies. And in this sense, we get the cultural saying of to be carried over the threshold, and we might have that image of the tradition of literally picking someone up and carrying them over the threshold. And this is also represented quite nicely at the town hall, which has a square, and then you have the swan, and you have the Janus head, again male female, with the female looking inward and the masculine looking outward, with a swan. And this is outside the town hall where one goes to perform the marriage ceremony. So we've got, again, this is in the middle, you can see here the middle bust that I've taken, which depicts the gate almost like a contained cell here. And then on the other depictions, we sometimes have the male female. Here we also have the ram figure, or the stature, looking out perhaps into the more material aspect of reality, and then the feminine goddess form looking looking almost to the inner. And we could look at other different depictions here also, with the looking out to the moon, looking the moon and the sun, the unity of the moon and the sun, the east, the moon, the west, the sun. There's different ways of looking at this dual nature of the Janus head. And then on the right, we have 2 figures exactly the same. So this is, you see different depictions of the Janus head, sometimes then looking exactly with exactly the same face, looking in both directions. Now, what I've been explaining in the first class of late is how this is kind of a beginning. The Janus head is like a it's the beginning of our understanding of a threshold. So the journey has led us to the work. We could say the journey has led us to, in this sense, to Rudolf Steiner, to anthroposophy. But we don't have to speak about it in these terms. The journey has led us at this point in life to feel a growing seriousness for how spiritual mysteries might play a role in understanding where we're going in our lives. So again, this is an emphasis on a path that has led us to this point. And a number of ideas I'd like to bring in here that I've been speaking of recently is about two things, which is hypnosis and a sense of tragedy. Now, why these two things? What I've been writing about recently is the 100-year centenary of quite a significant tragedy, which was the burning of the first Goetheanum on New Year's Eve of 1922 to 1923. And then again, the tragedy in the following year of the Christmas conference. And within a couple of years, Rudolf Steiner's death, and then later the split of the society in 1935. Now, these are specific anthroposophical dates that some will be aware of. And they're quite specific tragedies in relation to anthroposophy and in relation to the society. We have the split, the demise and final death of Rudolf Steiner himself. The difficulties and also deaths of some of the other anthroposophists around Rudolf Steiner and the karma of their lives. And then the tragedy of the burning of the first Goetheanum, and in some ways the tragedy of the conflicts and attacks on Rudolf Steiner and between people within the Anthroposophical Society around the Christmas conference, and then later leading up to the 1935 split. Now, all this, we're talking again of this Janus Kopf, one head looking out, that we could say, in this sense, that head is looking out at the anthroposophically specific aspects of tragedy. And then if we look out at how these things mirror out in the world, we see the tragedies that unfold through the 1930s in Germany, and then to the Second World War. Ongoing from the First World War and from the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, 1920, again, an important centenary with 2020 and everything that has happened with the pandemic in the last 3 years. Bringing those two dates very specifically to our attention. And then looking at aspects of continual chaotic situations of war and rebuild through from the end of the Second World War, 1945, on through the 20th century and on into our time. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing these two aspects, one, looking at the anthroposophical tragedies within the Anthroposophical Society, the other looking at tragedies within the world at large in a historical sense. And I'm encouraging us to bring these two things together and encouraging us to seek out how these two things can influence each other. And then what I'm encouraging us to do is to walk this path through our perceptions of the interplay of those two bases on reality, and to walk this path of a growing consciousness of how those things not only have affected the world and the destiny and the karma of anthroposophical work, but also to look at ourselves and how that has formed our own karma in relation. Now, in this, when I was writing about this, which I'll again put in a link below, what I'm emphasizing is two things. Not only tragedy and what comes with it, a certain PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm emphasizing hypnosis. So tragedy, in many ways in our lives, a tragedy can come in, a shock can come into the system, a shock, whether it's a loss of a job, whether it's a relationship problem, whether it's a health issue, whether it's something historical. A shock can come into our system. We can feel traumatized by this. We can feel it as a kind of tragedy. And then it can get suppressed because we have to get on with our lives. We push it down into the unconscious. And this, what I'm emphasizing here is this, again, can happen in a twofold way. Historically, as humanity, there have been innumerable shocks from the different wars that have happened continually through the last century up to our time. And then seeing how those mirror, how that has created the consciousness of humanity and what it means to be an individual in our society and culture. And then on a third level, how that affects you, how that affects one individually down to one's very own psychology in relation to these things. Now, hypnosis, I'm using here, therefore, as an individual hypnosis, as a hypnosis that all of humanity has gone through. And in that sense, a specific mass hypnosis, or some speak of a mass psychosis, which again was a term that was thrown around quite a lot in the pandemic. But really it's this sense for a deeper psychosis and hypnosis that can take place when one lives in the constellation of influences that have been established through this world we have of war, rebuild, focus on economy, and the kind of, to use a Foucauldian term, the depoliticization that takes place through living in a society such as this. And what I'm encouraging us to do is recognize how hypnosis has worked upon our own consciousness. Now, what's helpful with this is then what I want to do is bring this in relation, but to re-emphasize what I'd like us to do is to hold these two ideas of tragedy and hypnosis. And what I describe in the written text is this is quite a potent mix. And to recognize, be open to the fact that many of the things that we speak about, many of our views of life have received their consciousness or their level of ignorance, their level of light, their level of darkness, according to these social coordinates of the world as it has been established and transformed over the last 100 years, and how that has formed the society around us, and how that has forms the very ideas and the very beliefs we hold of what's possible in our very own minds. And part of what I'm outlining here is the need to right down into the anthroposophical work itself, right down into work with the first class, right down into the work with meditation, is recognizing how these sociological, historical structures that we have inherited, that we have internalized through education, through our upbringing, form the very basis of our consciousness in this society. Moving on here we have the lectures to the first class, and I'm not going to read it out. People can then follow up and read. What I'm summarizing is a lot that comes in these first two verses of the first class. And then these are the two paragraphs that we've been looking at recently. So I'm just going to read this out. It must be clear to us that we must take seriously all that comes as warning from the spirit messenger before daring to fathom what is found, not on this side of the yawning abyss, that is, in the area of the senses, but on the other side, spreading out as spirituality. This is veiled at first in darkness for human understanding, and can only be revealed by the countenance of the spirit messenger, who appears at first to be similar to the human being, but transformed into one of gigantic stature. Then, although he is so similar to man, his form is shadowy, as though he were a mere parable of man. He warns that without the appropriate seriousness, no one should seek what lies beyond the yawning abyss. The earnest messenger entreats us to be earnest as well. I'll just leave it there if you'd like to read through. Now, a number of these words, I think it's very important when doing any anthroposophical work or any work with the first class, or indeed any work with language in this sense and consciousness and meditation, that we take the words and look at, deepen our appreciation of these words and what they are depicting. Now, the first one is the spirit messenger. Now, Steiner's very good at helping us to be fluid and flexible in how we perceive spiritual realities. So firstly, I introduced this idea of the Janus head, of this dual activity of looking outside the temple, so to speak, or being at a gate, threshold, and then one head looking inside the temple, into the spiritual world, as if we're standing at the border of the sense world. Now here we've got on the one side, the sensual world of the senses that spreads out before us. And we're called to recognize that this guardian of the threshold. Now, at times, Steiner's speaking of the guardian of the threshold. At other times, he's speaking of the spirit messenger. At other times, he's speaking of the beasts that come towards us at the threshold. And that this or at other times the doppelganger. All of these are different words for the experience of ourselves at the threshold, on the threshold to the spiritual world. Another expression here, the yawning abyss, the veil, veiled, the sense of darkness. All these words, unless we bring ourselves, our own activity, to inwardly beholding what these words mean for us, and this is part of the active, meditative inner work of very vividly on the screen before us to perceive these words and to go deeper into our very own feeling, tasting, sensual creation inwardly, imaginatively of these experiences. So it's very much an experiential rather than a theoretical inner activity. And this is often the criticism that comes from anthroposophists themselves, but also people in many fields of esoteric endeavor, which is the map is not the territory. He says, as a helicopter flies above. The map is very much not the territory. The words, the description of Rudolf Steiner are not the lived, actual experience ourselves of these things. And as noble and great as Steiner's dedication and words are in marking out these realities, if they remain as a map, they are not the territory itself. Now, I think we all kind of know this. It's a call to engagement, to the actual activity of creating these realities. So first of all, we call up this image of ourselves, of a spirit messenger warning us at this abyss, at this gate. We then call up our appreciation of an abyss. Then we recognize the two areas, the Janus head of the abyss of the area that was once the area of the senses, and on the other side, spreading out before us, spirituality as the spiritual world that is lying before us. Thirdly, this is veiled in darkness for the human being, for the human understanding. And we are called to see the countenance of the spirit messenger. Now, this is one of gigantic stature. And I'd like to bring in our work here, since we're going deeply into these words here, this sense that comes also from, we talk in anthroposophical work of the inspiration of the archangel Vidar. And one of the words used in relation traditionally to Vidar is this sense of him being wide-ranging, to spread out over the senses. And we have this very nice description here in relation to the spirit messenger, to be transformed into a person of gigantic stature. And this inspiration of Vidar to take us out over the sense world in this expansive filling of the elemental worlds around us. Then, although he is so similar to man, his form is shadowy, as though he were a parable of man. And then we have the call to appropriate seriousness. Now, I don't think the appropriate seriousness, of course, this is the warning that comes. This is the feeling we have. And it's the feeling which I think brings many people anyway to anthroposophical or to esoteric work at all, because we feel the necessity for this seriousness to engage with the path we're on, to understand in a deeper sense what the spiritual, almost the knocking of the door on the door of our souls, of the spiritual world, as we sense all around us that there are mysteries, there are answers to the life that we are leading, there are answers to the life historically of humanity in the world around us that can only be answered truly from spiritual experience. And this is what anyway brings many people to the study of anthroposophy, and in a sense to the study of many of the different growth areas of psychology or NLP, the New Age, contemporary philosophy, even to contemporary arts, and to the engagement of many people in the different political activist spheres. And all of these areas of life are, in a sense, calling to us because of people's sense for this seriousness. And so I think it's quite significant that this is mentioned in this paragraph, a sense for seriousness of our meditative work, how the calling to inner imagination of ourselves, our very selves, as a spirit messenger that can manifest before us, that helps us to see the darkness that our own self has made of our reality, and how this calls us to engage with some of these mysteries of the threshold, of the gate to the spiritual world, of the veil that is drawn before our eyes until we start engaging with this work. The darkness that we sense of our own ignorance of many of these mysteries. And the earnestness with which we approach these things. And this is the earnestness which leads us on here to this second paragraph. And I'm just going to read it now, and without sharing the screen. And then when we hear that voice and have grasped it with due seriousness, we should be aware of how at first softly, most softly, and in abstractions, it wishes to give us indications and orientation from the spiritual world about the abyss which yawns before us, and from which the messenger holds us back, lest we take a careless step. And then we have the second two verses of the mantra. So I'll just read it again. And then we hear that voice and have grasped it with due seriousness. We should be aware of how at first softly, most softly, and in abstractions, it wishes to give us indications and orientation from the spiritual world about the abyss which yawns before us, and from which the messenger holds us back, lest we take a careless step. So again, this voice, hearing this voice, in inspiration, first of all, in abstractions. Now, we spoke the other day about this sense of darkness. And in this sense of darkness, there can be a suffering of feeling lost, of feeling forlorn, of feeling that all we shall ever come to is abstractions. And I was trying to point out, this is a very good first example of reframing that this sense perhaps of melancholy, of the darkness and the sense of abstraction, is not necessarily that we are lost in intellectualizing the content here. For that, I feel, would be very different. Intellectualizing, and this happens in many debates about such things, often ends in argumentation, fighting, debating who is right about particular interpretations of one sentence or another, or of one word or another. And this antagonism between people, I think, really disqualifies one for esoteric work at all. And it's the difference there between intellectualism and the beginnings of the spiritual work, which is a sense here for abstraction. That this is an experience. The experience of abstraction is an experience of the threshold. It's the experience of wanting to come deeper into words, deeper into our understanding of words and texts, and deeper into our understanding of the words and expressions that others use, and to question our own use of words, language, expression in what we are depicting for ourselves and for others. And again, this is one of the spiritual experiences that draws us to this work, that draws us to anthroposophy or to esoteric work at all, or to philosophy or any form of higher education really here. If one feels this inspiration, this love, this is the voice that we hear that's drawing us to these experiences. And again, this is where we feel the earnestness and the seriousness coming up again. So you see, the deeper that we engage with this text and the deeper that we engage with our inner perceptions, we are treading step by step into a deeper sense of inner inspiration. And again, I'd call us again to appreciate that this is part of this experience of Vida, of this archangel, and encourage us to also perceive this, that within this work we have this layer where Vida is inspiring us inwardly in our feeling life to keep on going, to keep on developing, understanding our understanding of the text, of the images that we are seeing inwardly as we create them, as we are going on this journey to the threshold and beyond. Now, that was a lot of text and a lot of explanation. So let's take another image here, which I also used the other day, which I think is helpful to address, and I'll recapitulate some of these concerns I've been addressing. So this is in terms of the challenges that one comes to here. Now, I think many people know that in the first class, we also depict the three beasts, which I've also referred to before, we have the beast of one's thinking, we have the beast of one's feeling, we have the beast of one's willing. And to also behold these inwardly is again a task of imagination, which we've spoken of before and we can come to again. This is, however, a different depiction from painting in Siena. And this is a painting of Saint Anthony. And I think this is a very nice depiction here of some of these aspects that we just looked at in reference to the paragraph. So we see here the darkness, also the darkness of the wings, the figure, the demon figure on the left, and also the inner cloak of Saint Anthony. And this sense for darkness cloaking his body down to his feet. Notice as well this lovely, the gray cloak, and very gracefully hanging around his shoulders. And then I was bringing this painting to emphasize this sense of the ordered world behind a sense that everything can be placed in the, look at the ordered trees on the hills above, a sense for putting things in order, categorizing, the abstract nature that's speaking through these forms. And then without going into, we could go into how the three, thinking, feeling, and willing, are reflected in these three figures. And I'm going to leave that. And you can feel into that and perhaps sense that. Because again, it's calling for our inner work to see how these things, how we can inwardly create our relation to these things. And then the other mystery here, which I think is significant, is you see his aura, his halo, gold and red, in the faces down to in the kind of genital areas of the demonic beings here. And recognizing how perhaps, again, these trials and tribulations of the path up to the gate. And then we can also at another point speak of the gates in terms of the Egyptian gates to the spiritual world, and how these are all guarded by demons of various design, and recognizing that this path to the threshold is going to be guarded by difficult experiences, as we see here for Saint Anthony, from the different demonic powers, whether they are, when we speak in anthroposophy, of Lucifer, Ahriman, or Azuric powers. We are seeing these as challenges for us, not only to progress spiritually over the threshold, but even to the very threshold itself, which means the guarding of the path to the threshold. And part of hypnosis is also recognizing that the very path itself to the threshold, to the spiritual world, can be one for the aspirant that is vigorously defended, and that the aspirant can be vigorously attacked on this path to the threshold. And St. Anthony confronts our gaze here in a very nice way, emphasizing the equanimity as one of the subsidiary exercises here. that helps to us to approach this threshold. And then I'd also like to share another painting here from Siena, which shows us also aspects of what I've been describing. So I thought this was particularly lovely in relation to what we've been speaking of, because we see the two men to the left engaged in what I was emphasizing earlier, perhaps a philosophical, intellectual debate. And we can then really get this sense here for shaped and framed by the pillars and the forms of the architecture around them, how these two might be completely oblivious to the hedge, the dark, thick, impenetrable hedge of darkness that is encircling like a threshold to then the fountain and the Christ-like or saint-like figure that is emerging from the fountain, again with the halo, to the right. And again, this is framed within abstraction. So the figure is framed in abstraction on the right, but it's not the intellectual debate of the two on the left. And so I think if you can see how this works, we have an impenetrable darkness, almost like an abyss. We can imagine this sense of a yawning abyss into that darkness. And then we can see perhaps the challenges that might come to these two noble philosophers, the challenges that might come to them intellectually, to that process of coming out of the head, out of a world of intellectualization, out through a gate, perhaps, to a sense of darkness, to the abyss, and then also to recognize that they live in all of this in an allegorical, a parable-like story that's left for us freely to imagine ourselves into in this painting. Now, this is called, this is devoted to Saint Susanna in the Pinacoteca in Siena. But the parable of the story, we're freely allowed to imagine ourselves into here. And I'd like to emphasize that aspect of when we understand here, not in the melancholic sense of the trials that we saw previously with St. Anthony, but more in the sense for the incredible potential of story making, of story creation, of the very creation of ourselves inwardly through these meditative exercises, but very much in a sense for our whole lives, and how the very story here of Saint Susanna or of Christ himself, or of this crossing of the threshold into a spiritual world, is actually calling forth in us this sense for the potential, the power of crossing the threshold, of becoming more intimate with the spiritual realities that we discover there. And then we can start to also feel this glowing red of the three panels to the left, and feel this different sense of light, which again, is another aspect of the first class, which comes in different lessons that continue after this first one. But it's a different sense of light to the colors that are woven around us in the sense world. Here we have an inner glowing light that's hard to show on this digital photographic format, but I think you can again sense the difference between an intellectual appreciation of these things and a living soul appreciation of these things, which moves from abstraction into a soul-filled, one could say, love of how color here manifests, or also other things in terms of composition. And then down into the creation, as Steiner speaks of in the first class, of having a sure step in the creation of new realities as we start to step over the threshold to the spiritual world. So just returning here to our sojourn through the desert, and just again coming back to perhaps this path back from where we went, to retrace our steps. So we saw two paintings. We analyzed two paintings as we stepped over. If we think right back to the beginning, we have the footsteps of each of the steps that we have made in this deepening of understanding of this paragraph 16, 17. And a deepening too of the different words that we use, and calling us to start to behold them in an abstract, imaginative sense. And that the deeper that we do this, the more intensely and engaged we do this inwardly, the sense of inspiration, how this takes us deeper into some of these questions. We spoke also then of Vida as sensing this angelic presence as part of this deepening of our appreciation of language. And then coming right back to the beginning, we had the Janus head, one head looking in, one head looking out. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to engage with the first class, we run a class every Tuesday or Wednesday. Please feel free to get in touch with me. We speak about these things and read the mantras. The class is about 3 to 4 hours long. We have music. We also have a club part where we can discuss our experiences of working with some of this content. And we also look at paintings like we did today. Sometimes I contribute, sometimes there's other people that contribute. We're a group of about 40 people, 40 to 50 people. And we also running conferences. Last one was St. John's. The next one will be Michaelmas. So please feel free to get in touch, follow us. There's a newsletter that accompanies everything that we are doing. And I will put links in the text below. And yeah, all of our work and all of my work is works on principles of gifting and donation, and any donations are warmly appreciated by myself and the others who work towards putting together this content. Yeah, I will endeavor to do more videos as we go along, and look forward to seeing any of you at the first class when we run this. Yeah, so please, you can subscribe. Please feel free to add any questions in the comments below, and that's all from me, and all the best.